The main thing to start with is to realize how much biomass is wasted in today's world. There's a huge opportunity space to use biomass that is being burned, that is being landfilled without really any good purpose. That's where we start.
What if the plastic bottle on your hand could become food for the soil? What if every material we touched was designed to nurture life rather than poison it? The technology to make this real exists right now, and the revolution is being written in code, shared openly, and powered by nature itself.
Welcome to Socially Conscious AI, where we explore the cutting-edge innovations transforming our world for the better and bring you conversations with the brilliant minds and ethical pioneers who are harnessing AI's power to address humanity's greatest challenges. I'm Valencio Cardoso.
And I'm Roman Burkott. Today we're joined by Dr. Alysia Garmulewicz, co-founder and co-CEO of Materiom, a platform that's fundamentally reimagining how we create materials. Think of it as nature's recipe book, making regenerative biomaterials accessible to scientists, designers, and manufacturers worldwide through open data and AI. A Rhodes Scholar with a doctorate from Oxford, Alysia has dedicated her career to the circular economy, asking a provocative question. What if the plastic bottle you throw away could fertilize soil or become food for fish instead of pollution? Based in Santiago, Chile, she's also an associate professor researching how we can move from extraction to regeneration. With over 20,000 innovators now using Materiom's platform and fresh backing from Google to deploy AI for materials discovery, Alysia is accelerating a future where everyday materials work with nature, not against it. Alysia, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me.
I wanted to start by just taking you back to your college days and specifically to your undergrad, where you said that reading Cradle to Cradle was a pivotal moment and it showed you not just like what we're up against, but like also what we are for. What do you feel like that shift in your perspective unlocked for you?
Yes, that moment was very pivotal for me. At the time, I had been spending the years of my studies focused on climate change and specifically climate policy. I had gotten very interested in climate change at an early age. At about 15, I had the luck of being able to go to Antarctica, and then it really inspired a huge passion for trying to reverse the changes that were specifically very potent at the poles. And you could see the changing ecosystems and hear the stories from the scientists who were on board. That really inspired me to work on climate policy. And I did have opportunities to go to the UN to be able to engage. And as a young person, you want to see change happen fast. And it was increasingly frustrating for me to go from that period of 15 to 21, 22, and really not see much change happening when it came to any global efficacy on the policy file. And at that time in university, I read Cradle to Cradle, and it resonated so much with me because the climate world and in general, a lot of the environmental movement is quite negative focused when it comes to the role of humanity on Earth. We think of ourselves as being bad by definition, really. And that's the kind of frame I'd grown up with in the climate movement, especially. And the Cradle to Cradle really just dismantled that as an idea. It said, what if humans could be good for the planet? And I remember reading that phrase and thinking, what if? It still brings an emotional response to me when I think about it, because I do think that's possible. And it's certainly not our current reality, but it is an act of imagination to rethink the materials that we build our world with, the energy that we use to power our world, all of these fundamental systems that we're part of can be rethought, and rethought especially with inspiration from the natural world, which is a great teacher for how we could do things differently. So that idea of a positive vision for humanity was very impactful to me and really set the tone for my work thereafter.
So that really shifted your mental model of how you see the
Exactly.
sort of the work that you wanted to do and the change that you wanted to make. Was there a moment when the theory became like real for you? Like when you touched something or created something?
That's a good question. So one of the ways in which I really saw a different world being possible, even though it is an example of an innovation that's quite far out from what is today the norm, was during my PhD, I learned about 3D printing as a technology. But what was interesting is I learned it from Janine Benyus, who's the founder of biomimicry. And she framed it as a kind of logic of technology that is more in keeping with how nature builds things layer by layer and how organisms create fantastic high performance materials with basic building blocks by adding structure rather than chemistry to create high strength materials, but with basic building blocks that are from nature. That logic, even though most 3D printing technologies do not actually do that in being able to it smushes thermoplastics together layer by layer. It's not the same thing, but the kernel of what could be and how technology could enable that transformation was quite fundamental to my thinking. My PhD then focused on if these technologies are enabling more decentralized or local production technology, that is a very important systems change as well that's more in keeping with the natural world. So those are examples of bridging to possible worlds that are definitely not with us today, but give you a sense of we can remake things quite fundamentally if we come together collectively to do so.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the takeaways there is like this whole notion that nature essentially layers things on. And I think of that as like building out a recipe, right? Layer in all of the different ingredients. And Materium in general has been described as like nature's recipe book.
Yeah.
Can you walk us through what actually is in this recipe book and what does the recipe for like biomaterial actually look like?
So, one of the most important insights that lies at the core of Materium is the working with these fundamental natural building blocks that the biosphere has evolved over billions of years to be able to actually recycle and build with in continuous, endless cycles of creativity and reuse. And that is the template that we can use to also build our human materials for large application spaces that currently are filled with materials polluting the planet. And so working with natural building blocks is the main starting point. So we work with bio-based polymers. These are polymers that nature works with, for instance, cellulose, chitin, which is can be found in the shells of insects and crustaceans. You've got pectin in the fruit peels of fruits. You've got all of the other parts of plant matter, so hemicellulose, lignin, for instance. These are the kind of basic building blocks that are very abundant on Earth and very useful when it comes to making materials. Then, when it comes to the recipes, we started Materium with the idea of a recipe book of being able to provide and open up access to information so that anyone anywhere would be able to use locally abundant sources of biomass and make materials for packaging or textiles or building materials out of those natural building blocks. And just like you point out, a recipe really does have a set of ingredients, a process for combining them, and example material at the end. That is the core of Materium, what we call our recipe commons. And we have recipes in there. You can also call them formulations from a more scientific frame of reference from our community. So we have over 20,000 innovators across 106 countries who use the database, and also a subset of them provide recipes in a kind of open access community generated way. And then we also pull from the scientific literature, open access scientific literature. So recipes or formulations that are developed by the scientific community, we index them and provide them in an easily searchable database.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I'm just thinking from a practical perspective, right? If I'm a designer and I want to create a, say, a compostable phone case, how would I use Material to get there?
For sure. So that example is really important to really understand what properties you're looking for. So if you're trying to provide some sort of protection over your case, are you trying to make the material hard or soft? There's a whole bunch of really technical requirements that you can start to uncover. And you don't have to be, you can be a designer and think of those with different terminology, but you can also be a material scientist that has a certain tensile strength or elasticity that you're trying to hit. But those properties are one of the most important kind of governing principles that would set you on your way. You can also start from ingredients, what ingredients you're really interested in. So, a lot of the innovators that we work with have a certain set of say, waste biomass that they really want to valorize and create a product from. So I really think that seaweed is a fantastic material that has great application potentials in packaging. So I'm going to explore what I can possibly do with seaweed ingredients and how I can make them fit the product requirements that I have for my phone case. So you can go from a purely properties perspective and then figure out what all the ingredients you could work with, or that you can start from the ingredients and then see how far you can push them towards your application. But in either case, you can use Materiom to find recipes to start with. And it's really important to think of this as the entry point into R&D. It's something you can use Materiom to come back and iterate again and again to find formulations with different ingredients that may improve your properties, et cetera. But the approach of R&D is very iterative. It's not a one-shot deal that you go and bake your cake and then go to market with a new material. You often come back again and again to continuously improve it, especially with customer feedback and with then the feedback from the market that you're trying to commercialize with a brand, for instance. So a lot of that process can be supported by Materiom with a kind of discovery process of new recipes and new processes to think about.
I think it's fascinating how this work is spanning like biology and material science, data science, and of course the circular economy as well. How did you get to such a interdisciplinary fluency? And for that matter, how does that shape the approach that you're taking?
I think that is fundamental. Interdisciplinary knowledge and fluency is fundamental to Materium's approach. It's perhaps in the DNA of the team. I think as a leadership team, Liz and I come from quite interdisciplinary backgrounds, and we are quite comfortable working across those kind of language barriers and absorbing new areas of knowledge. I think both of us love it. I certainly find it the most thrilling part of my work. It's something where you just get to learn from not only the world around you, but your internal team on a regular daily basis. I don't come from a material science background. I'm not a biologist by training, and I love the knowledge that I get from the specialists and the deep kind of experts that come from those backgrounds in our team. So that's something that I think is not only integral to the mission, where we are truly trying to reinvent our material world based on knowledge of ecosystems and biology and a deep understanding of material science and chemistry. But we are also trying to change a social system that has embedded inertia, that has a lot of dynamics that come from economics and market dynamics and human behavior, et cetera. So we are really embedded in that whole ethos of systems change, but at the kind of core scientific level, we bring together disciplines that are necessary to make that change happen.
Yeah, that approach that you have of just radical transparency, open source recipes in an industry that seems to be built on patents, trade secrets. Have you encountered resistance to this model?
The important thing is that we are a synergistic part of that. We are not in counter to or trying to disrupt fundamentally the kind of approach to intellectual property in our space. We are an accelerated starting point for developing one's own recipe that can then be gone on to be patented. And that is the thing is today, a lot of people are doing the same experiments with the same set of polymers, and they eventually will get to a recipe where they feel like that's their own protected IP that they'll have under trade secret or be able to file a patent on. But what we're trying to do is really provide a starting point for like a tide that lifts all ships to be able to get there faster. And the fact is that we're just wasting a lot of time trying to find those recipes and those kind of secret sauces that actually will be the materials of the future that everyone will use. So we, as I said, we're definitely a starting point for material innovation, and we're a place to iterate with, but we are not the place to find the final formulation that you will like. We don't offer the final formulation that is then your patentable recipe. That's for private companies to develop in their own internal R&D processes. We just help them get there faster.
Alysia, you recently launched Materiom AI with backing from Google. How does AI change the game for material discovery, and what was previously impossible that you feel is now within reach?
So, Materiom AI is an exciting first step for us. We are continuously working on more advanced versions of that, and we're excited this year to be working with users, with partners to trial that model. And we have been very fortunate with the support of Google.org and increasingly other foundations, such as the Patrick McGovern Foundation, Builders Initiative, and we are really on the cusp of being able to kind of really make an impact on this space. So it's very exciting times for Materiom to be in right now with the advantages that AI provides us. The important step change is really on speed and really on integration of information that was quite impractical before. I wouldn't say impossible, but very impractical. And to set the context, it usually takes about 20 years to bring a new material to market, which is slowed by years of trial and error. So you are trying to often find a needle in a haystack when it comes to a formulation that really fits that specification, say that perfect iPhone case. Maybe that's an easier target than some of the other materials that people are trying to find, but often it's very particular of exactly what kind of performance needs that a given type of packaging or a given textile fiber is trying to achieve in order to meet what a brand requires for the market. And that laborious finding and trial and error process can be radically sped up by AI. And that is the kind of magic we're aiming to harness. So on the one hand, we're looking at integrating a lot of information from the scientific literature. And on another side, we're also investing a lot in novel data generation because AI is only as good as the data you give it. So we are really excited to be putting a lot of work into new data when it comes to the natural polymer space. And our goal is to really help our users be able to find those formulations faster in the massive design space that we have to work with. Just imagine for a second that we have 100 years of R&D in petrochemical plastics. That means a huge amount of exploration has happened and a lot of money has gone into finding your way around that design space. By contrast, we have a very small amount of time and energy that's gone into the natural polymer design space. And so we need to use best in class technology such as AI to make that search process faster.
I think, like, in addition to speeding things up for you, like when it comes to process, have there been any surprises that AI has surfaced that like human researchers might have missed?
So the important thing is AI is not finding the answers. It's not a magical
Right.
oracle yet that is really plucking answers out of the blue sky that people didn't see coming, for instance. What is happening at the moment is it's an augmentation of that expert in the lab who has years, who has intuition, who has a lot of expertise. And what the AI is doing is it's helping shine a flashlight on areas to look further into and areas to not look into as much. It's an augmentation of expertise and really a speed up of the human process. So it's not so much a surprise magician as much as is really an amplification or an augmentation of the human expert in the R&D process.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's a good distinction to make. And you're absolutely right. I think what I'm hearing there too is this augmentation is now helping free up scientists to go and explore further and be a bit more expansive or creative in their searching.
Yes, precisely. It's something that, especially for small companies, is a really big potential game changer because a lot of, if you just imagine the David and Goliath situation we're in, the big petrochemical companies really have a lock on scale, on efficiency, on just the number of employees. There's just huge amounts of to have startups in the space trying to compete for market niches that have been occupied by petrochemical plastics for decades and decades is a very difficult thing. And it's really laudable and very inspiring, the companies that are doing so and taking them on and showing that a new future is possible. So companies like Notpla, like Sway, like Zampla, Traceless, these are companies that are demonstrating day in, day out that a different material future is possible. But any help we can provide from the perspective of augmenting their ability is something that we find very motivating for our work.
You've emphasized local and regional material production loops over centralized manufacturing. What does a distributed biomaterials economy actually look like? Maybe paint us a picture of like somebody who's gotten it right in their region.
Absolutely. So it's something that a lot of companies are really grappling with and painting the way with different types of feedstock. So if you have to think of it's the best metaphor I have for this different materials feature is actually comes from renewable energy. We grew up in a dominant petrochemical energy mix. And although that's still a major player in the world, renewable energy now is cheaper and it's growing in its market share every year on year. And so that is showing that a more decentralized approach to energy generation actually can work. And if you actually think of energy being different or the energy generation capacity being different depending on where the sun shines, where the wind blows, that frame of mind or that idea is very similar when it comes to what bio-based materials needs to look like. So the idea of seaweed being abundant everywhere is not the case, but it's abundant on certain coastlines in many parts of the world. And so understanding where packaging made from seaweed makes sense to scale up depends on the abundance of feedstock. And similarly, waste biomass is heterogeneous. It depends where you have certain local variability depending on what people eat and throw away, but you generally have a lot of waste close to urban centers, for instance. And that is also a geographic dimension to developing more regional approaches to supply chains. An example of this is a company called Banafi, who works to make alternative leather fabrics, and they're working with banana farmers in India, where banana farmers, they just waste or just leave to the side all of the stalks and rich cellulosic materials after the bananas are harvested. And those materials can be made into alternative leathers. And that is a local supply chain that makes a lot of sense for that part of the world that has a large amount of production in that case. It's an embracing of diversity for sure, but it's important to think of it not as a fragmentation of too many different types of materials, because the way that nature builds materials is with a common set of building blocks. And the polymers I mentioned before, like cellulose, pectin, hemicellulose, chitosan, these building blocks are repeated again and again in different types of biomass in different concentrations, but nevertheless, it's a common set to work with. And so you have to have that kind of regional approach to supply chain development to not risk over extraction, et cetera, of any given area that you work with. But at the same time, you can actually think of scaling out, scaling more horizontally in a way that makes sense for many needs that we have in the market.
I really appreciate that nuanced approach so it doesn't turn into a case of, hey, let's go cut down every banana tree in the world now so we can make sneakers out of them and create yet a new problem by trying to solve an
Mhm.
old one. I really want to dig into that vision of plastic as plant food. I find it inspiring, but I can't help also being skeptical. So, how close are we to materials that can truly nourish an ecosystem rather than just persisting as pollution?
That's a great question. So I'll give you two examples. One, an example of Notpla is very inspiring for our sector. So Notpla is a UK-based company. They make seaweed-based coatings for takeout food, boxes, cups. And that coating can be on, say, a paper or card-based backing. And that can provide the barrier properties necessary to hold hot food or be a barrier towards oil or whatever is that's in your salad. That's a technology material that they're actually scaling out and commercializing right now. And the impressive thing about it is that the coating is actually edible. It's not something that is what we would consider to be plastic. It's in the name. They actually got certified by the Dutch government as not plastic. And so that is an example of what you can do with natural polymers that is actually completely in keeping with not only soil ecosystems, but with our own human ecosystem if you ate it. It's something that is very compatible with natural ecosystems. And excitingly, it's also compatible with recycling technology as well. So that paper and card can be recycled. And the coating just washes out in the process. So it's something that doesn't interfere at all with the recycling infrastructure and actually is helps that recycling infrastructure by not contaminating the feedstock at all.
So with I think you said 20,000 innovators on the Materiom Commons, have you started seeing any patterns emerging? Are there certain regions that are going faster? Are there certain applications that are moving better?
So on geographic diversity, it's very diverse, which is very promising and exciting for the field. It's something that we see as being fundamental to our DNA and aims as a company is to really open up innovation everywhere. When it comes to applications that are building momentum, I would say certainly on the packaging space, you see a lot more movement in films and coatings, especially because those are just seem to be the beachhead markets that are really gaining traction. There also are really good, promising examples in the alternative leather space where fashion brands have the interest and ability to bring on new materials and really showcase them in high profile ways. And you also see examples of, say, a company like Shellworks that is making a PHA kind of material that's more of a thermoplastic that can be that's seeing that they have demonstration commercial scale up with cosmetics brands. So it's an example of some of the beachheads that are emerging, but that's how I would characterize it so far.
I'm reminded of what Roman had said earlier about cutting down banana trees. And I think in the point that I'm trying to think about is like there's this tension in the bioeconomy, right? Biomass for materials can compete with food production and biodiversity. How do you go about navigating this? Where are the agricultural impacts that you feel concerned about?
The main thing to start with is to realize how much biomass is wasted in today's world. And when I talked about the banana example, we're talking about the excess of the branches, the leaves that's burned today. So it's not something that is being used for some sort of really important purpose right now. There's a huge opportunity space to use biomass that is being burned, that is being landfilled without really any good purpose. That's where we start. And it's really important to also realize that there are other types of biomass like seaweed and mycelium, for instance, that can actually be cultivated and grown with a huge amount of benefit for carbon sequestration. For instance, seaweed actually sequesters more carbon than trees when it is grown. So that's something that is an opportunity space again on the feedstock side. So I think it's really important to start with what's actually happening in the world and certainly be aware and develop principles to help guide decision making so that we don't compete for land for food, for instance, and avoid the pitfalls that have happened with, say, biofuels, for instance.
And you've spent years both in like academia and entrepreneurship. What's the frustration or any dysfunctions you've observed that keeps biomaterials innovation from moving faster? Or is there anything that like people on the inside know but don't often say out loud?
I think one of the main drivers that's really helpful and needs more momentum is on the policy side. So there needs to be a lot more clarity when it comes to the way in which end of life is legislated or there's standards set in place. It's also important to have more clarity on the input side. So, what counts as bio based, for instance, and how is that mandated across different jurisdictions? There's a lot of opacity when it comes to the policy landscape that is a barrier to innovation, mainly because a lot of brands are trying to read the policy wins and understand what kind of restrictions or opportunities there are for innovation that is set by policymakers. So that intersection is really important and needs a lot more work in order to help innovators do what they do best, which is create great new materials.
If you had a magic wand, right, and if you had policymaking power for 1 year, what would you change?
I would certainly make it a lot more clear when it comes to definitions on what is a bio-based plastic, what is a compostable plastic, what is plastic with natural polymers, Though these are the kind of grayer areas that people are trying to navigate. It's very hard from the consumer angle to really understand what is just a good choice. So that's something that I think needs to be really enabled by policymakers is the transparency on what's going into the material and what it does after end of life.
Yeah, I've personally noticed being in restaurants encountering green straws, but then when I'm finished eating, is this recyclable? Is this compostable? Should I just eat it now? I don't know what to do with these. So I agree. Some clarity could go a long way there.
Absolutely. Yes.
So I'd like to shoot out to the future, 20 years. Can you walk me through a day in 2045 where regenerative materials have won? What's different about the way that we live?
Let's take the home. Imagine you're cooking dinner for your family, and instead of throwing your packet from your pasta in the trash, you actually just put it in the compost bin. That's number one, is that there's so many little wrappers, little films and packages and coatings, et cetera, that can just go into the compost bin. And whether that goes to your actual garden or whether it goes to the municipal composting site, that's a very clear vision for what we should be doing. That's a very low hanging fruit, in my opinion, is that those types of materials should not be polluting. They're eminently possible to make with natural polymers, and we just have to put a lot more time and innovation into it and get a lot of more buy-in when it comes to the demand side to make that happen. And then when it comes to the clothes we wear, that's something that is also very possible to imagine in 2045. So instead of putting your clothes in the washing machine and having all those microfibers and plastic fragments come out into the water stream and pollute our drinking water and everything, those fibers are natural and they also do not cause pollution. There's something where we're able to wash our clothes and the water isn't polluted as a result. That's a very clear goal as well that a lot of people, when developing alternative regenerative textiles, are after, which is also a part of that vision. Yeah.
What are the milestones that you're watching for signals that we're heading in the right direction or maybe even reaching the tipping point?
Mm. That's a really good question, and something we're actually working on actively is to develop a lot more of that kind of market intelligence around what we're tracking. I would say that the issue of scale is really important for our sector. So we're looking at some of the leading companies really breaking through now with their demand partners and reaching scale when it comes to getting those materials in consumers' hands and really closing the loop when it comes to understanding what a regenerative material is and how it performs and what it could mean for our future. And so that storytelling coming full circle into consumers and the brands realizing what a benefit it is for their impact and communicating their impact is something that we are on the cusp of. And we need lot of focus and time and energy going into getting more companies to scale. But that's something that is the near term milestone that we're aiming to push for. And we believe our R&D tools can really help companies bridge from lab to scale up in a much faster way to ensure that they get that boost and are able to scale up into the marketplace and get into the hands of consumers ultimately.
And Alicia, I really appreciate the conversation we've had so far. And as we're thinking about taking all this information and turning it into some sort of action, for our listeners who are inspired by our conversation, what's one concrete action they could take, whether they're technologists, maybe potential users, or just people who care about reducing plastics and toxic materials in general?
I think that's a great question. First of all, you can definitely check us out. We are an open community platform. So join and use Materiom AI and ask all the questions you want and learn. It's a really important science of bio-based materials that is very accessible, and you can really get on your own journey of making maybe even you'll be the next spinoff or the next startup in the space. So I really want to emphasize that anyone can get going on this journey, and some of the best companies started with people that were just curious and learned about how to make bio-based materials right from the get-go. So that's something that I would encourage. I would also encourage you to look at companies in the space. So we have an article that spotlights a lot of companies that you can look at, but companies like Kiori that makes rubber from olive pits and other companies like I've mentioned already, Sway and Notpla, Traceless, Sampla. These are companies also in the alternative leather space. You can look at Desertu. You can look at, as I said, Coffee, Modern Meadow. These are companies that are really pushing the envelope on what material futures you can imagine yourself. Ecovative, Lollyware. So I would recommend just searching them, and some you can actually get products. So you can get early examples of footwear made from these alternative leathers, et cetera. So you can participate, but you can also just support and really understand how to spread their name, and the importance of kind of amplifying what they're trying to do, I think is incredibly important, because one of the most difficult things in this space is just feeling like it's just such a big system to change. But when you start looking at all the leading lights in our space across the world that are actively developing and offering different materials, and realizing that you can actually get started trying to make some yourself and maybe develop a company out of it, it just makes everything actually possible.
Just wanted to say thank you, Alicia, and all the work that you and your team are doing. And it's really inspiring to hear about the work and then just see how it's being implemented in action.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Thanks to our inspiring guest, Dr. Alysia Garmulewicz from Materiom, for translating cutting-edge research into deployable tools for scientists, producers, and brands. Be sure to subscribe for more hype-free discussions at the intersection of AI and climate innovation. And why not join the conversation by leaving a comment? We'd love to hear your thoughts. For Valencio Cardoso, I'm Roman Burkott. Until next time, stay curious, stay conscious.